All right, so we covered the first chapter, Unity of Life, Scientific Method. Then we went to Basics of Chemistry, and we're going to kind of bring back some of those things that we talked about, basics of chemistry, into this lecture. Okay, and this lecture is talking about organic macromolecules, and some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about in this chapter, we're going to be talking about pretty much for the rest of the semester, definitely for the next several lectures. Okay, and so it's very important that you understand these, and really, if you understand these and get a good foundation of it, you're going to hit these in several other courses in your biology career. All right, so really want to pay attention to this. Okay, so organic macromolecules. So what makes up, or what makes an organic molecule organic? Well, they are molecules made up mostly of carbon and hydrogen. There are some organic molecules that are totally made up of carbon and hydrogen. All right, now carbon makes a good foundation for these organic molecules because of carbon has 4 valence electrons. All right, so 4 valence electrons, you see them right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and because of those valence electrons, carbon is readily available to bond to a great number of different atoms. All right, and those bonds that they make with those other atoms are covalent bonds. And you remember what covalent bonds are, right? All right, you need to. They are a bond where electrons are shared. All right, sometimes they're equally shared as in nonpolar covalent bonds. Sometimes they're unequally shared with polar covalent bonds, but it's sharing of electrons, covalent bonds. And as you see here, they are carbon can make rings. Okay, but they are basically 4 basic groups of organic molecules, and they are made up primarily of the following atoms: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Okay, and you see those atoms here. So hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Now, how those molecules attain their chemical properties is through the presence of different functional groups. Okay, and so again, these functional groups are attached to other atoms in the molecule through covalent bonds, and these functional groups give the organic molecules their chemical properties, such as polarity, such as acidity. All right, and here are some major ones listed here. Okay, phosphate groups. You'll see phosphate groups for a very long time if you continue studying biology. Okay, amino groups. Okay, we'll talk about amino groups a lot in a few minutes. All right, and then hydroxyl, carbonyl, carboxyl. You'll hit these when you get into organic chemistry. Aldehydes, methyls, acetyl groups. All right, but these functional groups are very important because they give the molecules their chemical properties. All right, so again, there are 4 basic groups of organic molecules. You have carbohydrates, you have proteins, you have lipids, and you have nucleic acids. Okay, all right. So here you have a carbohydrate, you have a protein here, you have a lipid, and nucleic acid. All right, so those 4 main groups you need to know. Okay, we're going to go over each group and characteristics of each group. Now, there are different ways to illustrate molecular structure. Obviously, the one that we'll mostly do is using here the structural formula. All right, but you have the ball and stick model, the space filling model. This is not necessarily important information. I just wanted to present this to you. All right, and again, when you're talking about structural formulas, there's different ways that you can do the structural formula. You can have it kind of lined out that you see here. You can depict a ring structure. All right, sometimes you can, like in a ring structure, the vertices of the ring, if you don't see a particular atom depicted, such as oxygen, here you just see the the angles. This would signify here's a carbon. If you don't see one here, such as here, 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 then you can assume that's a carbon. All right, so actually all four of these are depicting the same molecule. All right, they're just doing it in different ways. All right, and so how are these organic molecules built? A lot of these organic molecules exist as polymers. Right? And polymers are molecules that are made up of two or more monomers. Okay, and the monomers are the building blocks. Okay, so for each of these groups of organic molecules, you'll need to know the monomers. All right, and so chemical reactions happen all the time that build polymers for monomers, but also break down polymers to the monomers. So it goes both ways. All right, there's chemical reactions that build up the polymers, and then there are chemical reactions that break them down. And we'll talk about specific reactions that do these in later chapters. All right, when we're talking about metabolism, okay, you see reactions occur in cells so that energy is acquired and used. All right, and so metabolism, you have a breaking down of a molecule. All right, and these polymers are created through condensation reactions, and they're broken up or digested through hydrolysis reactions. All right, so here you have a condensation reaction, okay, where you have a building of a polymer. So why is it called condensation? Well, what do you think of when you think of condensation? That water forming on a cold drink of water on a hot day, okay? All right, so condensation means water forming. Well, if you look at this reaction right here, what's a byproduct? Water. All right, and so here you have the polymer being made, and then the water is a byproduct. So this is a condensation reaction. A polymer is produced. Now, hydrolysis means water breaking down. Okay, hydro means water, lysis means break apart. All right, so here you have a polymer, all right, and you also have a breaking down of a water molecule, all right, and so this is a hydrolysis reaction, a breaking down of a polymer, okay, and as well as water. All right, and so when we talk about metabolism, we'll talk about metabolic reactions. So cells build polymers for monomers and break down polymers to release monomers. Okay, and when we talk about metabolism, chemical reactions, what is metabolism? Basically, it's a series of chemical reactions by which cells acquire and use energy. All right, and a lot of these metabolic reactions can occur. They won't occur as quickly without the presence of enzymes. And we'll talk about enzymes in a couple of chapters. All right. Okay, but again, so these when we're talking about these metabolic reactions, we'll see hydrolysis reactions and condensation reactions. Okay, and so again, there's the definition of hydrolysis and condensation reactions. Make sure you understand the differences and what occurs in each one. Okay. All right, and so hydrolysis, polymer is broken down as well as a water molecule. In condensation, a polymer is built up and a water molecule is formed. Okay. All right, so here you have what type of reaction is this? All right, the easiest way to look at it is say, where's the water? If the water molecule is a reactant, okay, so on this side of the arrow, these are the reactants and these are the chemical reaction products. So if water is a reactant, that means it's being broken down, and so this is a hydrolysis reaction. Well, in this example, water is a product. That this means that water is being formed. So this means this chemical reaction is a condensation reaction. Make sure you can identify hydrolysis versus condensation reaction. All right, so let's get into the four groups, talk about characteristics of those four groups. First one we'll talk about are the carbohydrates, and these are the most plentiful biological molecules. When you're talking about the formula, they have a basic overall formula, and that it consists of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that if you have 6 carbons, you'll have 6 oxygen, and you'll have 12 hydrogen. Okay? All right, so all these carbohydrate molecules, they all contain carbon, they all contain hydrogen, they all contain oxygen, and they are in this 1-to-1 ratio. For every carbon and oxygen atom, you have 2 hydrogen atoms. So what are the uses of carbohydrates? They're used as structural materials as well as transferable or storable forms of energy. Okay, and what's the monomer? The monomer is a monosaccharide. Okay, so, and very important to note, monosaccharides are the monomers of carbohydrates. All right, and so if you look at this, all right, this is a glucose molecule. All right, and as you can see, there are 6 carbon atoms. All right, count the oxygens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, now how many hydrogens would you expect? You would expect 12. Okay, do you get that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 2 right there, so that's 11, 12. All right, so like I said, monosaccharides are the monomers, also called simple sugars. Basically, it's a 1 monomer of sugar. Monosaccharides are sweet tasting. They readily dissolve in water. So if they are readily dissolved in water, what type of molecule is it? It's a polar molecule. Because remember, we talked about it in the last lecture. Water is a great solvent. Okay, it means that polar molecules readily dissolve in water. And what you usually see in monosaccharides, 2 or more hydroxyl groups. And most monosaccharides have a 5 or 6 carbon backbone. So glucose is a monosaccharide. Ribose, we'll talk about that. Deoxyribose, we'll talk about those sugars in a few minutes. Okay, fructose is another monosaccharide. All right, but look at these 4 carbohydrate molecules. In the name, what sort of stands out as a similarity? That they all end in OSE. Okay, so you may look at a molecule, you may not know exactly what it is, but if you see that suffix OSE, that's an indication that it's a carbohydrate. Okay, all right, so carbohydrates end in OSE, or sugars end in OSE. All right, we'll see other molecules, all right, or groups of molecules that have a similar suffix. Okay, so if you can memorize those suffixes, then it can help you sort of figure out what type of molecule you may be reading about. All right, so if you have two monosaccharides come together, you have a short chain carbohydrate, either called an oligosaccharide or a disaccharide. Okay, so those are two sugars, a polymer of two simple sugars bonded together. All right, so some examples: lactose, which is basically glucose and galactose. All right, lactose is found in milk. All right, so for people that are lactose intolerant, they can't break down that sugar. Okay. Sucrose is table sugar. So sucrose is a polymer of fructose and glucose molecules. All right. And so, but when you have a chain of monosaccharides, then you get into complex carbohydrates. Okay, another name for complex carbohydrates are polysaccharides. All right. Polysaccharides can be either straight or branched. All right, and they are very important for organisms because they are one of their major uses is energy reservoirs, okay, or for the use in structural materials. For example, cellulose is a very important plant structural material. Starch, okay, plants use starch for energy reserves. Okay, glycogen is an important energy reserve in animals. And then in some animals, they use polysaccharides as structural material for their exoskeletons. Chitin, okay? So if you think of a lobster, crawfish, okay, those are crustaceans. Well, they have exoskeletons made up of a complex carbohydrate called chitin. All right. Now you don't have to memorize these formulas or be able to recognize. These are just kind of to show you that some are branched, some are more straight lined molecules. But here, just kind of showing you some similarities. Okay, again, COH, they're carbohydrates. Okay, so cellulose, your starch, chitin. This is glycogen. Okay, so very important for plants and animals. Now, you may think about from a nutrition standpoint, you may have heard, hey, carbohydrates are bad. A diet high in carbohydrates is bad to have because they can be considered bad carbs. And what are bad carbs? They're stripped of all bran, fiber, nutrients. They're processed, like white flour, refined sugar, white rice. The problem with that is you digest them so quickly that they cause dramatic elevations in blood sugar. It could lead to weight gain, hypoglycemia, which is high sugar, blood sugar, as well as low blood sugar, because you can have a sugar crash, which is hypoglycemia, and eventually a long-term diet high in these things can lead to diabetes. Now there are good carbs out there, and those where are digested more slowly, they still have their fiber, and your blood sugar, they don't, you don't have those big peaks and crashes. These good carbs kind of keep your blood sugar at a normal, stable level. All right, proteins. Okay, next group of organic macromolecules. So we finished carbohydrates. Now we're moving to proteins. Okay, so proteins are the most abundant um, um, or no, I'm sorry, not most abundant. They're most diverse in both structure and function. So proteins are very important for structure and function in living organisms. Okay, the monomer of proteins is amino acid. All right, and so here is an amino acid. okay? Or the basic structure of amino acid. So on one end of the amino acid, you have the amino group, right, which with nitrogen here. The other end, you have the carboxylic acid group. All right, well, now you know why it's called an amino acid. You have the amino and the acid, okay? All right, so all amino acids have this basic structure. All right, so what's different? This blue R that you see here, this signifies the side chains or the R groups. All right, and so each amino acid has a different R group that makes it a unique amino acid. Okay, so how are amino acids bonded together to make proteins? They have a special type of bond, all right, called peptide bonds. All right, those are covalent bonds between different amino acids. All right, and so what are peptide bonds? They are made between the C, the carbon right here, this carboxylic acid group, and the nitrogen of the neighboring amino acid. Okay, so if you had amino acid, all right, right here, that was going to be bonded to this amino acid. All right, well then this H and this OH would go off to make water, right? Because this is a condensation reaction. Okay, and so this carbon and the neighboring nitrogen from the neighboring amino acid would be bonded together, and that would be the peptide bond. All right, so here are the amino acids here. Again, I'm not wanting you to memorize these, I'm just wanting to show you for this, for your reference. So there are 20 different types of amino acids. Okay, there are some amino acids that are called essential. All right, and so what makes an amino acid an essential? They need to be consumed. Okay, so these essential amino acids, you have to have these in your diet somehow to get them. Okay, because your body needs these. They can't make them on their own. Well, these amino acids are non-essential. Okay, these amino acids can be synthesized by the body. All right, so the covalent bond that links amino acids in a protein is called a peptide bond. All right, and a short chain of amino acids is called a peptide. And as the chain lengthens, as the polymer gets larger and larger and gains more amino acids, it will eventually become a polypeptide. All right, and proteins consist of polypeptides that are hundreds or even thousands of amino acids long. All right, so here, what I was talking about. Okay, so you have two amino acids, methionine and valine. Okay, and then you're going to form a peptide bond. Well, where's that peptide bond formed between these two amino acids? And if you see here, this OH group, all right, of the carboxylic acid is going to go away. Okay, and this hydrogen with this bonded to this nitrogen is going to go away, and it's going to form water. And so what you're going to have is the carbon of this amino acid and the nitrogen of this amino acid are going to be bonded together. So right there's the peptide bond between these two amino acids. Okay, so there's the peptide bond right there between these two amino acids. All right, well, proteins have different levels of organization. Okay, all right, and proteins function in movement, they function in defense, they function in cellular communication. All right, we just mentioned enzymes a few minutes ago, but most enzymes are proteins. Okay, and a protein's biological activity arises from and depends on the structure of the protein. All right, and so like I said, there are different levels of structure. So you have the primary structure, and that's just basically the linear series of amino acids, and it defines the type of protein. So primary structure is just what amino acids are in that line, okay, or that are in that polypeptide. Okay, well then the secondary structure is that polypeptide chain can form twists and folds. Okay, then you have the next structure up, or the next level up, which is a tertiary structure. All right, the tertiary structure is non-adjacent regions of proteins a join to create compact domains. And then the highest level of protein structure is the quaternary. All right, these are two or more polypeptide chains that are closely associated or covalently bonded together. All right, and so the big takeaway from here is to know, like, okay, there are different levels of structure. Primary is the basic level of structure, and then quaternary is the highest level of structure in proteins. Okay, so there you go. All right, kind of in illustrated for you. All right, and so and a good example of this is hemoglobin. All right. But one thing I want to add before we get to talk about hemoglobin, may come up later as well, is that if you lose this structure, okay, if the protein loses the structure, it can lose the function. All right, and so when we say a protein is denatured, well, in that process of denaturing, the protein will lose this structure, and when it loses its structure, it no longer performs its normal function. All right, so hemoglobin, okay? Hemoglobin is a highly organized protein. All right, so it has four levels, okay, from primary all the way up to quaternary. Well, the quaternary level of structure in proteins is they have subunits. They have two alpha chains and two beta chain subunits. Okay. All right, and so if something happens to that structure of hemoglobin, all right, at any level, it's not going to be able to carry out its function. Don't worry about this. Well, sometimes with proteins, you may have other additional parts or other additional molecules that are attached to them, such as lipids or sugars. All right, so you may hear in other classes glycoproteins or lipoproteins. Well, it's just a very complex protein molecule with an additional sugar or lipid. Okay, let's get back to sort of protein structure and function. So heat, some salts, shift in pH. Remember pH from the previous lecture, or other chemicals like detergents can denature a protein by breaking hydrogen bonds. And again, denaturing of a protein means that it's losing its structure. And when a protein denatures and loses its structure, it can lead to a loss in function. Okay. All right. So if we go back to hemoglobin, okay, what's the function of hemoglobin? And we'll talk about this later in later chapters as well, is that it carries oxygen to your cells. Okay, hemoglobin is a protein, major protein of your blood, and found in your red blood cells. All right, it helps the red blood cells carry oxygen to your body cells. All right, well, if that structure of the hemoglobin is messed up, such as in sickle cell anemia, all right, it doesn't have the correct structure, well, then it inhibits that the function of carrying oxygen. Okay. All right, so we'll stop right there and pick up with the next part of this lecture.